Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and I am broadcasting today from Philadelphia. Just gave a keynote here at the Barnes Foundation, a beautiful museum. And today I am going to be talking about what it is and what it takes to be a disruptive leader, and in particular, some of the characteristics of a disruptive leader. This is research I did for my book, the Disruption Mindset. And so I'm taking just some of the material directly out of that. So for those of you seeing it, it may be a rehash and a remembrance of some of these key ideas. But I want to put them in the context, especially of some of the work that we're doing right now at my firm around the new ways to lead. We're about to publish a new report that I'll be talking about over the next few weeks, but also want to talk a little bit about just some of the lead-ups a disruptive leader. So I just have a couple, it's going to be more slide-driven today because there's a lot of content I want to put out there. But I just do want to have a reminder that I do think about disruption as an opportunity for change. And I just realized my mic is probably not as good as it could be right now, but hopefully the sound is coming through. That disruption is an opportunity for change. And in particular, the way that you think as a leader about how things are working is a really important thing. I'm going to just try to see and make sure this works pretty well. Hold on as I mess a little bit with the settings, and hopefully this works. Yes, it does. So thank you for bearing with me on that. So a couple of things that I really want to talk about today is what are these characteristics and what does it look like to be a disruptive leader? And one of the things that I found to be very helpful was to go back and look at this whole idea of hardiness, that you are building resilience, that you have grit. It's a key area of research around what makes a leader successful. His ability to set a direction and then stick with it through thick or thin. And some of these hardiness traits, again, this is based on previous research, are three things: commitment, control, and challenge. And I'll go through and give some examples of those, but commitment basically says, I know this is what we need to do as a leader. I'm committed to sticking through this through thick and thin. Control is this belief that I actually have the ability to have an impact on the outcome. You're not a victim, you're going to lean into things. And challenge says, I'm not going to accept that what is happening today is going to always be the case. I can actually challenge the situation and be successful at that. And so in my research, in looking at these common traits, I surveyed over 1,000 people across 5 different geographies: US, UK, Germany, and then also looking at Brazil and China. And 2 things came out. There were a set of mindset and beliefs, and then also behaviors. And it's these 2 things together that created a disruptive leader. And some of the really key behaviors of these disruptive leaders, I'll just go through them very quickly here. When it came to commitment, the mindset and beliefs were, there was a belief that there was always a better way to do things. What we may have already works great. And some companies and leaders may say, hey, we've been doing this for 10, 20, 50 years, and it works great. Why do we need to change anything? A disruptive leader is going to look at that in their commitment, their belief, and the thing that undergirds everything that they do is that there's always a better way to do things. And we will not discover it unless we try lots of things to see if we can even sometimes incrementally improve things. We're not going to accept that things will never be there. And the behavior is that they're constantly explaining the why behind why they're doing things. So they have an idea in their mind, and they are very good at conveying and communicating their commitment to that belief of what the change needs to be. From a control perspective, believing that you have the ability to actually influence things with the outcome of their behaviors. So that the belief and the mindset is that I can control the situation. Things may be falling apart all around me with lots of disruption. Let's think about COVID. Let's think about any of the changes we've had to go through over the past years or decades. And there's a belief that through my actions, I can control the outcomes. And behaviors expressed in that, in particular of these disruptive leaders, was in a very particular area. It was a belief that the people around them, the people they were leading, could also do this. So it wasn't just a belief in themselves as leaders, but also belief in the team's ability to control the outcomes. And what this started having together was this mindset that change is good, and also behaviors that allow these leaders to influence and to lead and to empower the people around them to achieve these amazing things. And the challenge part is, again, they see opportunities out of these problems. They never see a problem as bad news. They think, oh, that's an opportunity to improve. It's a different mindset and a belief. Instead of thinking that this is a bad thing, this is maybe an opportunity. And then they're also just encouraging people to constantly take on those beliefs themselves and giving people the permission and the blessing to try new things. And so when we looked at this, we characterized people across all of these behaviors and these beliefs in these two tracks. And then we asked them a very simple question. We asked them, how much do you see yourself as a disruptive leader? To what extent do you believe that you can actually make change happen, be exponential in the change that you want to create? So status quo, meaning you don't like anything to change, and disruptive is you like things to change a lot. And not only do you like things to change, you believe you can create meaningful, lasting change in organizations and the people around you. So I was camping this weekend, and I was meeting a new friend, and he explained to me that he'd been eating the same exact breakfast for 20 years because he liked that. But in his life, in his work, extremely disruptive. So we all have different types of disruption quotients about what we like to change, things we like to keep the same. But think about your level on a scale of 1 to 10. How much change and disruption are you able to drive in the world around you? So it could be your organization, yourself, your ecosystem, your community, but how disruptive are you? So we asked these over 1,087 leaders this question, how disruptive are you? And then we asked them those traits that you saw before, and we came across a very interesting matrix. And so the things that we see are these realist optimists in the upper right-hand corner. Again, when we lay these two out, these are, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. So these realist optimists are the ones who can drive disruptive change. They see themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 as 7.1, so they have the highest scores. And they represent about 27% of leaders. And they are really high in this openness to change mindset. And they also have these leadership behaviors that are really there to empower and to inspire people to create that change along with them. And again, a little bit over a quarter of the leaders. You go down, you see the agent provocateurs. These are many of my friends in Silicon Valley. They have great ability to change mindsets, but they may not be as strong in those leadership behaviors. So they're really good at inspiring people, laying out that vision, but may not be as comfortable creating and driving that change. They oftentimes partner with people on the upper left-hand corner here, the steadfast managers. And this represents the majority of people, about 50% of people. And their openness to change mindset is very strong. It's not that strong. They're managers. They protect and preserve the status quo. But their leadership behaviors are really well developed. When a change does happen, they know how to rally people around this, empower people, make sure that change not only sticks, but also scales. So you can see how important steadfast managers are. They may not be at the forefront of the change, but when the change comes to them, they really know how to implement them. And then my favorite group, my favorite archetype are the worried skeptics. These are the ones who are maybe not so comfortable with change. You can see their score, average score is like a 4.8. But wow, they are, again, maybe not so quick on the uptake, only about 20% of the population. But I love the worried skeptics, because they're the ones that go, I don't know about that idea. Doesn't seem very safe. How are we going to do this? Their focus is much more on the individual contribution and what they're looking at. They don't want to change. But I do think that the worried skeptics play a very important role in any change strategy or change agenda you're creating, which is to really think about all the things that could go wrong, because when you're creating change, a lot of things go wrong. And they're the ones who can look around the corners, raise those questions. And they're really good partners with the realist optimists, because the realist and the realist optimist is going to listen to the worried skeptic and say, you have something valid here. Let's explore that. Is it real? Is it not? How are we going to pull this into our scenario planning, for example? And so these are 4 archetypes. Is this in every single organization? Because even if you're a highly disruptive organization, like an 8, 9, or 10, you're going to have people across the spectrum, people who are 10s driving all this change, but you also will have people at the lower end who may not feel so comfortable. And I like to say that you can only move as fast as your slowest worried skeptic. So when you come across a worried skeptic, you really need to understand what's really going on with them and understand, is it because that they are looking at this from a very realistic perspective? It's worth looking at because they are maybe seeing something that you don't. Or are they just not on the bus? Do they truly not want to go through this change? In which case, you need to have a very different kind of conversation with them to say, do you really want to go on this journey? Because if you don't believe in the place where we're going, you don't believe in the outcomes you want to have, you don't think that that's the right place to go, the right direction, then maybe you shouldn't be on this bus. And then find it and work together to find a new place for them to be, where they will be more comfortable with where they're going. So it's important to understand who are the people in your organization who meet these different archetypes, because every organization has every one of these archetypes. Again, the realist optimists are what we would all like to aspire to be, but some of us may actually be more of these agent provocateurs, where we're playing a very different role and then therefore need to partner with our steadfast managers. Or you could be a steadfast manager of the vast majority of people, and that's fine. But be ready to scale the change because you know how to do that. That is your gift as an archetype. You may not be at the forefront of the change, but when it does come to you, you know how to implement it and scale it. So that's the gist of these characteristics of great leaders. I would love to hear, again, I put it up as a comment here, just how do you stay optimistic? Because I know the people listening to this live stream and the recordings tend to be these realist optimists, people who are driving the change, and you want to know how to drive the change. I would love to hear from the people on now and also afterwards. How do you stay optimistic? Because it is so hard when everything is coming at you, when people are saying, okay, yeah, you got a great vision, but you need to slow down. There's too much change for us. We're going through change fatigue. You know, you've got great ideas, but we need a quarter off from doing this change anymore. Just go take a vacation or something. So I think the question becomes, how do we actually do this? How do we do this well? How do we encourage the people around us to be thinking about that future, but also thinking about what we need to do today, that realist side of things, to be able to make this all happen? So what I'd like to do is to go on and talk a bit more about some of those actual steps that you can take. Oh, one thing I do want to talk about first, that there is, and some of you may have heard me talk about this, there is a significant gender difference when it comes to disruptive capabilities. And one thing, I'll just use the realist optimists as an example. You can see here, I'm going to make this as big as possible, that the realist optimists, they have the same level of openness mindset and leadership behaviors as men. So the scores on a scale of 1 to 5 are very, very similar, very high across all. Exactly the same. But when it comes to the disruption quotient on a scale of 1 to 10, women saw themselves as less disruptive than their male counterparts. And this was especially true in the United States. And what I found interesting about this, again, if you look at the characteristics that define and correlate with high disruption quotients around mindsets and leadership behaviors, they should be exactly the same. But you can see in every single archetype, women were significantly lower than the men. And I think one of the things that this is an issue for us to realize is that as we are trying to develop more disruptive organizations, as we are in the process of developing disruptive leaders, there's something in the water in the way that the word disruption and the roles that people play that we have to pay attention to. Gender is one of the determinants of it, but there's also everything, all sorts of different factors that may be in play. So understanding that diversity of how different we are, the sine curve of how we think about disruption, that we are on different planes. We have different comfort levels. We come at disruption from different places. It's not an off and on switch. And in particular, looking at the mindsets and the leadership behaviors that need to change, looking beyond these groupings of around diversity and looking at the mindsets and behaviors and saying how we can change and develop them is a key thing. So I see lots of questions and comments here, and I just want to get to some of them. Just going back, we had, thank you, Marissa and Hans, for making sure that I knew that the sound was coming through, so I really appreciate that. I had this comment from a LinkedIn user that when I was talking earlier about commitment and control and candor and challenge, there's also another C of candor, which I think disruptive leaders, so thank you for adding that in. It's, again, the honesty, the ability to tell the truth, to be clear, to be able to clear with each other is a key part around leadership. And Marissa has this great idea about how to remain optimistic. Try to marry it to an idea that they already support and then build it out further. Great advice, Marissa. People constantly come to me and ask, how can I convince my executive that this is the right thing to do? And I like to say to them, to your point, what are their top 3 objectives anyways? What are their core beliefs that you can tap into that support this new idea? If you can relate that idea to something that the way that they're trying to achieve their objectives or the way they see the world, you're so much better off. You're ahead of the game because they can now connect those dots between the way they see the world today and how you potentially see the world. You're doing that translating for them. And then Danny has this to share. The reason behind the change tends to be a motivating factor for me. So that again goes back to that commitment. Why are we doing this? Who are the people who are going to benefit from this? How is the world going to be better? How are our customers going to be better? So understanding that is a very key thing. So LinkedIn user was asking about these questions again about why is it that women are significantly lower than men? Great question. I found the correlation, not the causation. This is the frustrating thing about research and data. There's a lot of hypotheses here that because disruption, really the whole idea of disruption, of causing problems, being the troublemaker, may have some societal norms against it that play against gender perceptions of how we should be behaving. I know that as a woman with my ethnic background, there are definitely things in the way I was raised and my values that you don't make trouble. You are in there to smooth things over. You're the peacemaker. You make sure that everyone's happy. Instead of walking into a room and raising my hand, which I often do now, I started feeling much more comfortable with that in my career, saying, with all due respect, I disagree. I think there's a different way to take things over. And it's not a natural play role that, again, we may, again, regardless of gender, that we may feel comfortable doing or not. Hans has a great program comment here. Change can happen in parallel in normal operations, and merge or cutting when ready. It does not have to be all or nothing. Great point, Hans. That some of the most disruptive organizations I can see are really slow moving, lumbering giants, let's say in healthcare or in financial services. They feel like they move at glacier speeds. And the people who are leading them sometimes like, I'm not very disruptive. I'm like a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10. And then I point out to them, but your organization is a 2. You're killing it. You're so much more disruptive than your organization, and you're moving people along. An 8, 9, or 10 in an organization that's a 2 is not going to survive for very long. They're going to get ejected by the immune system that says we can't handle that much change. So it's appropriate that you're a 3 in an organization that's 2. So I think that's a great point, Hans, that it's something that's constantly going to be happening. Abigail has this comment here that say for me, when we have a clear vision and end goal, that's my motivation, what I try to amplify across the teams. Again, can't talk enough about this behavior of disruptive leaders, of explaining the vision, taking it over and over and over again, explaining it. One of my favorites has always been Jeff Weiner, who is the former CEO, now chairman of LinkedIn. And every time he entered a room or a meeting, he would always say, I'm Jeff Weiner, CEO. Of course, you know that, you work here. And he would say, and our mission is to connect the world's professionals. And one of the ways we'll do that, he'll talk about a strategy or a value that's relevant to the conversation that's to come. And he did this in every meeting. And one time an employee asked him, Jeff, when are you going to stop doing this? You do this every time. And Jeff very wisely replied, I'll do it when people stop looking surprised. And so, Abigail, I think that's a great point. The thing that is really important is that to be really clear about why we're doing this, to stay motivated, to stay focused, and then amplifying that over and over and over again. Be saying it almost like you feel like a broken record, but believe me, people need to hear it over and over again about why we're doing this. Let's see what another LinkedIn user, maybe the same person. A lot of this presupposes that you are alone as a leader. In my work, I find other leaders around me a source of optimism and inspiration. Thank you for sharing this. I think it's a really good point that we are disruptive as leaders that are disruptive, leading disruptive teams and colleagues and people around you. I do believe that I've talked about this before, that in order to create disruption, to overcome all these obstacles and barriers that are in the way, you actually have to create a movement. And movements are most powerful when you are no longer leading them. They take on a life of their own. And I find that to be a source of inspiration and optimism, that when you're down in the dumps, go and talk to your team. Go and talk to some of the customers that you're trying to work and support, because you need that energy. You need that feeding of your optimism, because at some point it's going to get drained. So planning and building that in is such an important part for people. So thank you for those comments. I keep them coming. I'll come back to you again if you have comments along the way. But I do want to go on and talk about what are some of the steps that you can take to develop your disruptive leadership. I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see the text. When it comes to commitment, again, commitment was one of the 3 traits of hardiness. One of the things, again, we talked a little bit about this, is to develop a shared vision and purpose. We may have a purpose, maybe we have a vision, but is it shared? Is it somebody at the spur of a moment can say, this is what we believe in? One of the reasons I joined the company I joined is because I so believe in its purpose, which is to use the power of ingenuity to build human potential in a technology-driven world. You know, ingenuity, human potential, technology-driven world. This is my shtick. This is the stuff that I believe in. And so being part of that really deepens my commitment and my enthusiasm around the kind of change we want to create. And so some of the ways to do that is to just simply encourage people to dream big. The bigger the dream, the more disruptive we're going to be to build that dream. To mirror back as their leader, some of the deepest desires is alignment between our shared purpose and what are their personal desires, the things that they want to accomplish and see in the world. And then again, as I said before, look further down the road to go faster. I was just looking at Mark Zuckerberg's 10-year plan. And you remember that 10-year plan? He had this beautiful swooping vision, and at the end was a bunch of technologies like lasers and AI and VR and AR. And now we are living in the metaverse. They even changed the name of the company. That vision was put out in April of 2016. So again, he saw this vision 6 years ago, and it's just now coming to fruition. But you have to think that far down, 5, 10 years down the line, to imagine that future and to commit everyone together to meet that future. Another area is control. Again, the idea that you can have this impact. And this is the biggest disconnect or surprise that I found, is that the most disruptive organizations actually were incredibly stable, incredibly structured and process-driven. And as a result, there was tremendous ownership of this vision down deep into the organization, because everybody knew what everyone else was doing. There was agency, there was openness, there was accountability created up and down throughout the organization. So people were not worried about how we're going to do things, plus the process. Everyone knew what the control and order was going to be in order to find, iterate, execute on, and scale the disruptive change. So some of the best ways to do this, what could go wrong? Lots of things could go wrong. So let's write up those scenarios, prepare for all of them. Use really good postmortems on your existing process today to get better at looking at these things and to create a better relationship with failure. And that comes to giving permission. I think of it as giving blessings for people to try new and different things, and also a tremendous amount of forgiveness and grace to encourage people to again, take on that ownership. But that permission, the blessing, the grace, the forgiveness creates the stability and the safety for people to create and try all these new and crazy things too as well. And then finally, I do think we need to be thinking about our relationship with failure, because we will not challenge the status quo unless we know we have the permission to not always succeed. And I don't want to say permission to fail, because if we recast the failure as not failing, but as getting us more data, giving us more feedback on what worked and didn't work, and giving us a new perspective once we are in that new place, we're going to look at the world very differently. So in the beginning, we may not have a great relationship with failure. So these little experiments are not just to be proof points or pilots, but it's to train us on how to have challenge so we can be more hardy in the face of disruption. And to foster this curiosity, I wonder if this could work or that could work. Let's try a little thing. And as we begin to gain more confidence that we can challenge the status quo, we'll take on bigger and bigger challenges. I love this idea of searching for flow, because there is a flow to challenging where it does get easier. It becomes part of your everyday process, where it's no longer something that's big and deep and scary, but it's something that we just do as a regular basis to challenge each other. And our relationships were so strong that when you challenged me, you asked me about something to think about the world differently, think about myself differently. I see it as a gift of feedback rather than something somebody is saying, and I feel defensive about how things are going. And of course, practice optimism. That when you constantly think there's a way to do things better, you're going to want to always challenge and say, how can we find that way? Because we always believe things are going to get better, then things are going to get worse. So that's what I have for today. I see more comments coming. I love switching back and forth and seeing what happens here. So let's see here. Where was I? Patrick really liked this, encourage dreaming. How often do people say to us, you dream too big. Your dreams are unrealistic. We'll never get there. And we're trained, kind of hammered down constantly to say, do we have permission to dream? Of course we do. We may not always be realistic about it, but let's set aside reality for a little bit, dream of what could be possible, feed that optimism, and then come back to reality. Because that dreaming, that optimism, anchored with reality is what brings that power of the realist optimist leader to the front. Again, LinkedIn users, we have so much to say. I love this psychological safety and intercultural dialogue of what works for me, but it's easy to say. It is important to stay up to date on several fronts and have a genuine interest in understanding people in the world around me. It takes a lot of time and energy. Thank you for sharing this, because again, it does require effort. You're moving out of your comfort zone to re-examine, are my assumptions true still? Am I creating that psychological safety for myself and for the people around me, holding space for this change, holding space for people to be vulnerable, to admit the fact that I don't know what's going on. It's not working the way I thought. Help, I need the support. Those kinds of things are such an important thing to be able to do. And then Danny has some great comments here too. Employees need to feel safe and have trust in their leadership and team in order to dream big. Thank you so much for sharing that, Danny. I love this, that safety, that container, whichever way you think about it. These are such important things for us to think about and be aware of, that are we doing that for ourselves, but also for our teams? Because these characteristics, again, that I put up before about being a leader do not have, they need to be developed. When you see seedlings coming up of this, are you going to water and nurture it? And then pluck out the weeds of the naysayers. Look at the word skeptics and help them see that their comments if directed in the way of being helpful, can be incredibly valuable to the organization. Lynn has this one comment: if you're not driving change, your value may be in jeopardy. So you're very welcome, Lynn. I'm so glad you're finding this helpful. But if you're not driving change and you're just maintaining the status quo and being a worker bee and doing things, that may be valuable. But at some point, are you supporting that change? Are you being part of that change? Are you seeing it, embracing it, and saying, okay, this feels a little bit uncomfortable, but I see why we need to do this, and move forward with it. So moving forward with the change, if not necessarily driving the change, are all really good things. All right, and thank you, Eric, for chiming in from Rochester, Minnesota. And again, thank you all for joining today. Great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. Next week, we'll be talking about how to break down silos in organizations. This is a particular interesting topic because we tend to have silos so that we can deeply explore expertise to have career progressions for people in those groups. But it also means that we tend to have these really big silos and we don't communicate within organizations. And again, just a precursor to some of the new ways to lead. How do we think about leading in these very traditional organizations that may need new ways of structuring? And how do you do that without blowing up the org chart? How do we leave the org chart in place and yet be able to break down these silos so we have greater connection and fluidity between the different parts of the organization? So stay tuned for next week. Bring examples of what are the silo problems that you're facing, because we're going to tackle as many of those as possible. So be well, stay safe, grow as a disruptive leader. And again, I would love to hear, again, anytime you're able to share your experiences of successes, your challenges, because that's how I continue to learn and grow and do all the work and research that I do. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.